What's going on, my dogs? We're back here with another video, back here with another reaction. And today we have the SpongeBob theory. I haven't seen this video yet. It just popped up on my page. So I'm like, fuck it, we're gonna react to it. I have a little bit of this J left. I got back from the gym probably an hour and a half ago. So I ate lunch late and I gotta eat dinner probably in like another half hour to an hour. So I'm like, I just sparked this shit up real quick. I don't smoke really anymore, or I try not to at least, because it makes me want to eat everything. And you know, since I've been going to the gym and shit, I can't just put whatever in my body. So yeah, when I'm not really hungry, I gotta spark up, and that shit helps my appetite. But yeah, we're gonna sit back, watch this SpongeBob theory, and yeah, enjoy. Grab your snacks and shit. Tell your friends about this channel, you know what I'm saying? Let's get it.
Incredibly popular series of mine where I take SpongeBob episodes and try to find the meaning in these very formative experiences the show's characters undergo. Whereas we usually end up talking about the old squidster, today I want to talk about the sponge himself, SpongeBob SquarePants, and arguably the most traumatizing episode he's in. When you think of peak SpongeBob, you usually think of those first 3 seasons, but today's episode actually comes from well into season 5. And it's called Spongehenge. Spongehenge, a witty reference to Stonehenge, is one of SpongeBob's least funny episodes, but it's also one of its scariest, as it tells the story of SpongeBob being followed by jellyfish to a point where he has to escape society altogether. It's a very unsettling episode, and that's an understatement. It's also in a lot of people's top 10 worst SpongeBob episodes list. But it's a lot more than that.
I wouldn't say worst, low-key.
Let's take it from the top. The episode starts with 2 restaurant goers leaving a diner with takeout. All of a sudden, they notice a heavy gust of wind. The one fish claims it's Neptune, the god of the sea,
the more newer ones are
mythology, and the other claims everyone knows Poseidon is the ruler of the sea, which, according to most websites, is the actual truth, and is also the god of the sea for Greek mythology. At the end of the day, the wind blows away the fish's takeout food, and he screams, "Why, dear Neptune?" The leftovers fly over the city until they hit SpongeBob in the face. He licks them up and recognizes that it is indeed goulash. Now, goulash was an oddly specific choice for the writers to use, and I looked up the symbolism behind the dish, and I got nothing, it's just goulash. But in the process of tossing out the goulash, SpongeBob discovers a sound that the wind makes in his holes. It doesn't take long for this music to reach a jellyfish, who instantly grows pretty attached to Sponge. And by attached, I mean attached. He crawls into SpongeBob's head and swarms around his brain until the morning.
I remember this
come
episode.
the morning, the jellyfish doesn't
remember this episode?
In fact, he sends over a swarm of jellyfish that prevent SpongeBob from being able to go to work. He's eventually dragged into work via a hook by his boss, Mr. Krabs, only to show up to work pretty much dead. But he isn't at work for long, because the jellyfish swarm the Krusty Krab and take him away. So now his work is gone, so where to next? Patrick's house, where the jellyfish actually sting Patrick and leads to Pat kicking out SpongeBob for being a negative influence. What a terrible friend, to be honest. So SpongeBob is forced to leave society, and he crawls into the one place they can't find, a cave, where he sits out for years and constructs a stone replica of himself using a rock, and eventually grows that facial hair he always wanted. Then he gets the idea to use that rock, but bigger versions of it, to lure the jellyfish away from him. He essentially recreates Stonehenge. He goes back to Bikini Bottom, and the world is gone, a reference to the Planet of the Apes. Flash forward another few thousand years, and aliens have taken over and are still examining these strange rock figures, and that's the end of the episode. And that's a pretty dark ending, no? I think this episode is definitely one of the show's most unsettling, like I said, as far as how it leaves you. For one, canonically, it assumes that those last moments were the last that Bikini Bottom saw of SpongeBob, and the last that we saw of Bikini Bottom altogether, which is pretty depressing considering Patrick's last words were that he was a negative influence, and that Mr. Krabs spent his last moments reeling him in, abusing the poor lad. And SpongeBob just kind of disappeared and went crazy, and we're to assume he just went crazier and eventually died alone. And as soon as I learned that this was episode 99B, that's when it hit me that this is most likely just the last SpongeBob episode. We're forgetting one small detail though, and it's what happens at that beginning. If this really was Neptune or Poseidon, we're to assume that this wipeout was intentional, which leaves us with 2 questions of why did this happen, and what is the point? Now my first thought was, oh, maybe Poseidon is just really annoyed with being called Neptune. A lot of this is him getting his revenge on society. But then I was like, no, it's gotta be more than that. In this episode are themes of both religious beliefs and climate change, and I think this episode serves as a statement for how a civilization reacts when both their beliefs and physical surroundings are altered. I do think the root of the entire episode is in that small conversation at the beginning, especially after further research into the religious lore of Bikini Bottom. Based on what I could find, Poseidon wasn't mentioned in the series at all up until this episode. He does later show up in Sponge on the Run, but honestly that movie is so detached from everything else in the show, I don't even want to take it into consideration. But for the most part, it's been established many times that Neptune
you can tell
is
their
the
colors
ruler
not
of
as
the
bright,
sea, most notably in the Golden Spatula episode, as well as the movie. But something I noticed, especially after this fish's argument, is that I don't think Neptune was ever a god. Sure, he had godly powers, but that didn't necessarily make him a god himself. In fact, in the first SpongeBob movie, it's made very clear that he's actually a king, and honestly, he's barely that. When he loses his crown and reveals his bald spot, he feels pretty powerless. Sure, he shares the same traits as the mythological god Neptune in that he has a short temper, but there's nothing in this movie or in any of the seasons that suggests King Neptune is a god. In fact, a god is technically ageless, and if King Neptune is going bald, it doesn't add up, which is my way of saying that she's right. This wind is definitely not King Neptune, but I also don't think it's Poseidon. See, I think Poseidon exists, sure. If I gotta include Sponge on the Run, I will, and it makes the case for him being an actual god in this universe, but that said, that doesn't necessarily mean that this destruction is necessarily caused by Poseidon.
SpongeBob,
based on that movie, Poseidon just doesn't seem like the type to destroy Bikini Bottom for any particular reason. There's no lore suggesting he wants revenge or that he gets angry. It just doesn't add up. So now I'm like, what is this wind? For the record, the wind continues for the next 3,000 years. It never stops. And I'm just like, where is it coming from? Why is it happening? So I start thinking, Neptune. Oh, Neptune. The actual planet of Neptune is rarely, if ever, referenced in the show. Now, I'm not good with space science, but not only is Neptune made mostly of water, but it's also famously extremely windy. You Google the windiest planet and you literally get Neptune, which, if you know where I'm going with this, is to suggest that this episode is the story of a civilization crumbling physically and mentally as their entire beliefs and existence are questioned, as they have been living on a different planet the entire time. According to Ismail Hamdi, the only way for a god to die is to destroy the significance their names hold. In this conversation, the debunking of Neptune as the god of the sea essentially kills Neptune as a god, redefining the name as less of a figure and more as the planet in which these fish live. Now, a few things. Something that immediately debunks this is the numerous times SpongeBob and his gang make their way onto land, all of which come across very Earth-like. When you look up Planet Earth on the SpongeBob Wikipedia, there's basically a episode for every continent out there. They've been all over the place. But most of this show, through this lens, can be assumed to be a hallucination or false reality. There's tons of theories that SpongeBob is hallucinating for most of the show. A concrete episode we can cite as an explanation for where we are in the universe is Sandy's rocket, where they go into space. In this episode, it's never specifically shown that they leave Earth. They do circle the moon, which is a stretch. Neptune is pretty far from that, but that's not really the point. They get there and they come back. And that said, maybe this isn't our moon. Sandy's size suggests that this is actually way too small. My point is, it's never shown that they're specifically leaving Earth or coming back to it, so this could very well be Neptune the whole time. The thing about this theory is because it's rooted in a false reality, most of the episodes that prove Bikini Bottom takes place on Earth can be debunked because they've been living through a false lens. And also, a lot of those episodes don't add up with this original SpongeBob timeline I'm basing things off of. But their literal home isn't the only thing that breaks in this episode. In fact, there's a few things we should be looking at. One of which is obviously SpongeBob. SpongeBob's entire life falls apart, starting with what used to be one of his favorite activities turning into a nightmare, followed by him being late for the first time in his career as a fry cook, which coincidentally also ends up being his last, and then being beaten senseless by his boss, and then being left abandoned by his own best friend. The guy is tortured. What breaks is SpongeBob's perception of his surroundings. What's interesting about the religion in Bikini Bottom is that there aren't rules or whatever, the way there are rules and guidelines for certain religions in our our world? From what I could find, nobody really knows the religions in Bikini Bottom. It's only vaguely understood that they worship King Neptune, and this episode proved some people disagree with that, which is horrifying, that debunking King Neptune, this singular figure, embracing the truth of their surroundings, is enough to cause such a chaotic disruption. Whatever they held onto with King Neptune was apparently tons of good morals, and it poses the question of what is lost for SpongeBob as he transforms into a psychotic mess, deprived of connection and forced to make do with a rock after assuming everyone hates him. I see this episode as a horror story, that after years of SpongeBob using jellyfish as food or as prey, that nature, now fully recognized, is coming back to haunt him, treating him and the rest of Bikini Bottom as prey. When that disassociation happens, SpongeBob loses his mind. His world, now sanded over, is gone. His friends assumed to have died, and like them, SpongeBob is assumed to starve and die a slow, painful death in a barren wasteland, which comes down to his legacy.
By
his
the way,
legacy is Sponge-Henge, a mysterious structure that, as proven by the aliens of the future, has this unknown origin. I mean, perhaps it's a happy ending, considering they serve as a place of celebration for jellyfish every year, but it's undoubtedly unsettling, seeing as though SpongeBob's only legacy, a legacy that's lasted thousands of years, was his final suffering. And I think that's it. While I usually like to find the meaning in why this show does what it does, Sponge-Henge is left ambiguous in a really terrifying way. That Bikini Bottom took place on Neptune all along, and that the citizens died a terrible, mysterious death with the realization of that. SpongeBob episodes usually leave you with some sort of message, and the message here is that the universe is something more powerful than any form of human connection, and that nature can be violent enough to wipe out entire civilizations if it comes down to that. And that's how SpongeBob ends. So yeah, with all that being said, thanks for watching. Check out Sponge-Henge and form your own opinion. And before you head out, I want to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. Now, Squarespace...
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I'm not gonna cap. A lot of these TV shows, they have a lot of knowledge in them. Like, they actually have stories. You know what I mean? It's not just it's not just all like made up and shit. Like, they actually teach you shit. Probably teach you more than in school if you think about it. Like, I don't know, but that's why these TV shows are pretty fire. But yeah, that's gonna do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. You know what I mean? I hope you grab some snacks and, you know, you just watch this video with me. That's what I really want to do. I want to just literally like make videos that you guys want to watch, and then we can just vibe together with them. Like, fuck it. But that's gonna do it for today's video.